Chapter 35. Facts are but the playthings of lawyers, tops and hoops forever a spin. Alas, the historian may indulge no such idle rotating. History is not chronology, for that is left to lawyers. Nor is it remembrance, for remembrance belongs to the people. History can as little pretend to the veracity of the one as claim the power of the other. Her practitioners, to survive, must soon learn the arts of the quidnunc, spy, and tap-room wit, that there may ever continue more than one lifeline. Back into a past we risk each day losing our forebears in forever. Not a chain of single links, for one broken link could lose us all. Rather, a great disorderly tangle of lines, long and short, weak and strong, vanishing into the mnemonic deep, with only their destination in common. The Reverend Wicks Cherrycoke, Christ and History. Why, Uncle Ives insists, you look at the evidence, the testimony, the whole truth. On the contrary, it may be the historian's duty to seek the truth, yet must he do everything he can not to tell it. Oh, pish, tush as well. 'Twasn't Mr. Gibbon's sort of history in every way excellent that I meant, rather Jack Mandeville, Captain John Smith, even to Baron Munchausen of our own day, Herodotus being the godfather of all, and his refusal to utter the name of a certain Egyptian deity. Don't say it! What? Seek the truth and not tell it? Shameful. Extraordinary. Things that may not be told. Hadn't we enough of that from the old George? Just so. Who claims truth, truth abandons. History is hired or coerced only in interests that must ever prove base. She is too innocent to be left within the reach of anyone in power, who need but touch her, and all her credit is in the instant vanished, as if it had never been. She needs rather to be tended lovingly and honourably by fabulists and counterfeiters, ballad-mongers and cranks of every radius, masters of disguise, to provide her the costume, toilette, and bearing, and speech, nimble enough to keep her beyond the desires, or even the curiosity, of government, as Aesop was obliged to tell fables. So Jacobites must speak in children's rhymes, as preachers do in parables sometimes. Tox, Pennsylvaniad, Book 10, of course. Hogwash, sir. Uncle Ives about to become peevish with his son. Facts are facts, and to believe otherwise is not only to behave perversely, but also to step in imminent peril of being grounded, young pup. Sir, no offence meant. I was but pointing out that a single version, in proceeding from a single authority. Thelma, Uncle Ives raises a monitory eyebrow. Time on earth is too precious. No one has time for more than one version of the truth. Then let us have only jolly theatricals about the past and be done with it. 'Twould certainly lighten my schoolwork. Mr. Lespark's phiz grows laden with menace. Or read novels, adds Euphemia, her tone of dismissal owing more to her obligations as a guest than her real sentiments, engaged more often than she might admit with examples of the fabulist's art. As if having detected a threat to the moral safety of the company, Ives announces, I cannot, I say, energetically enough insist upon the danger of reading these storybooks, in particular those known as novel. Let she who hears heed. Britain's bedlam, even as the French Salpêtrière, being populated by an alarming number of young persons, most of them female, seduced across the sill of madness by these irresponsible narratives that will not distinguish between fact and fancy. How are those frail minds to judge? Alas! Every reader of novel must be reckoned a soul in peril, for she hath made a devil's bargain, squandering her most precious time for nothing in return but the meanest and shabbiest kinds of mental excitement. Romance, pernicious enough in its day, seems in comparison wholesome. Dr. Johnson says that all history unsupported by contemporary evidence is romance, notes Mr. Lespark. Whilst Walpole, lying sick, refused to have any history at all read to him, believing it all must be false, declares Lomax, gesturing with his brandy wine glass. As if, at the end, he wished only truth. Walpole! Euphy plays an E-flat minor scale whilst rolling her eyes about. What of Shakespeare? Tenebrae still learning to be disingenuous. Those Henry plays, or the others, the Richard ones, are they only make-believe history? Theatrical rubbish? As if finding much enjoyment in speaking men's names that are not Athelma. Aye, and Hamlet, suggests the Reverend, staring carefully at the youngsters in turn. Her eyes are lashes width too wide, perhaps. Oh, but Hamlet wasn't real, was he? Not wishing to seem to await an answer from her cousin, yet allowing him now an opening to show off. Which Athelma obligingly saunters into. Of course he has the data. All in all, a figure with an interesting life of his own. Alas, this hopping, quizzing, murderously irresolute figment of Shakespeare's has quite eclipsed for us the man who had to live through the contradictions of his earthly life, without having it all refigured for him. Then did he really have a distant cousin named Ophelia? Tenebrae inquires, a shade too softly to be heard by any but Athelma. And did he, historically, break her heart? More likely she was out to break his, being his foster sister, actually, working on behalf of his enemies, though with no success. A minor figure, who may have charmed Shakespeare into giving her more lines than she merits. But who does not charm the disinterested seeker? Did he love anyone then? Besides himself, I mean. He ended up marrying the daughter of the English king, as a matter of fact, and later, in addition, the quite intimidating Hertford, Queen of Scotland. What about that stage strewn with corpses, wonders Uncle Lomax. 2 wives. Barbary pirates take as many as they wish, twinkles Euphy. Oh, Euphemia, aunt of lies, Tenebrae, shaking her finger in pretended sternness. Mercy, Bray, I was nearly one myself. Hadn't been for the old Dalus here, you'd be calling me Aisha now. Had to run the invisible snake trick that time, none too reliable in the best of circs. She plays a sinuous air full of exotic sharps and flats. The company redeploy themselves in the direction of comfort as the moistly disposed Uncle Lomax steers again for the cabinet in the corner, presently returning with a bottle of peach brandy. Upon his first sip, the Reverend reels in his chair. Why, bless us, 'tis from Octarara. Amazingly cognizant, Wicks. I once survived a fortnight, snowbound, replies the Reverend, upon little else. 'Twas at Mr. Knockwood's by Octarara Creek, in the terrible winter of 64-65, when, after 4 years, the surveyors and I once more crossed tracks. 'Twas a more tranquil time, before the war, when people moved more slowly, even, marvellous to say, here in Philadelphia, where the bustling might yet be distinguished from the hectic. There were no sedan chairs. Many went about on foot. Even St. Nicholas was able to deliver all his gifts and yet find time for a brisk pint at the Indian Queen, which apparently is where Jefferson composed the Declaration of Independence. There you go. Marginalia. I was back in America once more, finding, despite all, that I could not stay away from it. This object of hope that miracles might yet occur, that God might yet return to human affairs, that all the wistful fictions necessary to the childhood of a species might yet come true. A third testament. I had been tarrying over Susquehanna upon a ministry that had taken me out among the wilder sort of Presbyterians, a distinct change from the Mesopotamian mystics of Kutztown or Bethlehem, a bug-ridden, wearying, acidic journey. Among these folk, good folk, despite litigious and whiskey-loving ways, I was not welcome. In my presence, dogs howled. Milk turned, bread failed to rise. Moreover, a spirit of rebellion was then flickering across the countryside, undeniable as the northern lights, directed at Britain and all things British, including ineluctably, your miserable servant. What we now style the stamp crisis was in full flower. The African slaves called it the tamp. Unusual numbers of riders were out every night. The province seemed preparing for open warfare. White boys and black boys, Paxton boys and sailor boys, a threat of mobility ever present. Through this rambunctious countryside, a coachful of assorted travellers make their way Philadelphia-ward, each upon his mission. The purposefully jovial gamer, Mr. Edgewise, in whose purse already lie more of my chits than he really likes to have out at any given time, has won from me a sum we both must view less as any real amount than as a complication to be resolved at some unnamed date. I lose yet again. Why, damn, Rev, just write me another note. What's it matter the colour of the paper? Who has cash anyway? Business, then, in this province, wagering included, was conducted overwhelmingly by way of credit. The flow of cash was not as important as character, duty, a complex structure of debt in which favours, forgiveness, ignominy were much more likely than any repayment in specie. Mr. Edgewise is travelling with his wife, who, when she must, regards him with a phiz that speaks of the great amounts of her time given over, in a philosophical way, to classifying the numerous forms of human idiot, beyond the common or blithering sort with which all are familiar. The bloody-minded eye, for example, recognized by the dangerous sea of white all round the irises of the eyeballs, or the twittering variety by the infallible utterance frightfully. Then one has Mr. Edgewise. We have passed, without comment, out of the zone of influence of the Western Mountains, and into that of Chesapeake. As there exists no Maryland beyond an abstraction, a frame of right lines drawn to enclose and square off the great bay in its unimagined fecundity, its shoreline tending to infinite length, ultimately unmappable, no more, to be fair, than there exists any Pennsylvania but a chronicle of frauds committed serially against the Indians dwelling there, checked only by the ambitions of other colonies to north and east. Our coach is a late invention of the Jesuits, being, to speak bluntly, a conveyance, wherein the inside is quite noticeably larger than the outside, though the fact cannot be appreciated until one is inside. For your benefit, Depew, the mathematical and philosophical principles upon which the design depends are known to most students of the appropriate arts, so that I hesitate to burden the company with information easily obtained elsewhere. That my authorial authority be made more secure, however, it may be revealed without danger that at the basis of the design lies a logarithmic idea of the 3 dimensions of space, realized in an intricate connection of precise analytical curves, some bearing loads, others merely decorative, still others serving as cam surfaces guiding the motions of other parts. We believe you, Wicks. Pray, do go on. Bound through the nocturnal fields, the land asleep, the sky pressing close, losing at an ever unadjourned game of all fours, dyspeptic from the fare at the last inn, restlessly now and then scanning the dark outside for any light, however distant. I was bounced out of a disgruntled reverie by the machine's abrupt slowing and eventual halt out in the middle of a night already grown heavy with imminent snow. Waiting at the roadside were two women, who proved to be mother and daughter, dresses flowing as homespun was never supposed to, and faces that were to drive me, later that night, unable to sleep, beneath the beam of my writing lanthorn, to diaristic excess. Yet, how speak of luminosity in that pre-snowlight, or say flawless, or in particular otherworldly, when in fact in cis-Alleghenic America apparitions continue, life not yet having grown so Christian and safe that a late traveller may not, even in this deistically stained age, encounter a woman of just such unearthly fairness, who will promise him everything and end by doing him mischief. Indeed, already in the course of this journey we had encountered what may well have been a victim, fixed and raving in the battered road of some such night interception. As the pair of creatures boarded the machine, I mutely asked, not prayed, for all my prayers in those days must be questions, are these now come for me, to be my own guides across the borderlands and into madness? But, to my surprise and perhaps disappointment, their eyes will meet no one else's. As the machine gathers speed, it becomes perfectly clear that the young women intend to sit in companionable but perfect silence for the entire journey. One by one, around the travelling interior, small private lanterns begin to glow, whilst I, long accustomed to finding beauty only among the soiled and fallen, having thereby supposed a moral invariance as to beauty and innocence in women, grow distracted at the very conjunction, undeniable, overwhelming, each with her hair tucked away neath a simple cap of white lawn, tied under the chin so that her face is the only part of her body exposed. Faces innocent of all paint, patches, or pincering, naked as Eve's own. Mr. Edgewise leans forward to introduce himself in a mucilaginous voice he would rather have described as cordial. And how far would you ladies be travelling this fine evening? Because of the net outflow of light from her face, the daughter is seen instantly to blush, whilst the mother, with a level gaze but without smiling, replies, "To Philadelphia, sir." "Why, 'tis Sodom upon Schuylkill, ma'am," the blunt but kindly traveller, rolling his eyes about expressively. "What possible business could be taking a godly young woman down into that unheavenly place?" "My story must be only for the ears of the lawyer I go to hire, sir," she answers quietly, in the same determined voice. all of us stare, each in his own form of astonishment. You intend, it happens I am first to speak, to engage the services, forgive me, of a Philadelphia lawyer? Good lady, surely there is some recourse less extreme. Your family, your congregation, the officials of your church. She is gazing at my clerical collar, within which I must appear shackled, secure as any Turk's slave. Are you one of these, the English church, Net? How might I speak of my true church, of the planet-wide syncretism among the deistic, the oriental, Kabbalist, and the savage, that is to be, the promise of man, the redemptive point ever at our God horizon, toward which all faiths, true and delusional, must alike converge. Instead, I can only mumble and blurt before the radiance of these young pietists something about being between preferments at the moment, so askew in my thoughts that I've forgotten my new commission and indeed the purpose of my journey, even using interpropendary again, after promising a certain deity that I would refrain. But her innocent attention has reached into the dead vacuum ever at the bottom of my soul. Humiliation absolute. Mr. Edgewise, a devotee of machinery, the newer the better, produces a flask of curious shape and surface, devised in Italy by a renowned Jesuit artificer, out of which, to the wonder of the company, the gambler now begins to pour steaming hot coffee into a traveller's cup he has by him, and hands it to the young woman, who introduces herself as Frau Louise Redzinger of Conywingo, as she continues to sip more and more eagerly at the refreshing liquid, which Mr. Edgewise is content to keep providing ever more of, out of the strange and apparently inexhaustible flask. Before long she finds herself talking quite readily. Philadelphia, sirs, can hold little to surprise me. My sister lives in the most licentious Babylon of America, though they are pleased to call themselves Bethlehem so. Lizelle happened to marry a Moravian, now a baker of that town, the two having met upon the ship that carried us all here. Her destiny was to be fancy, as it was mine to be plain. I, who do not know one grape wine from another, whilst Lizelle, already between her first and second letters to me, had slid steeply into a gaudy Christianity, araw with putzing and gay distraction, little to be distinguished from that of Rome, having indeed its own carnival, its gluttony and lustfulness, and the trombone choir. Imagine, a wonder their minister is not addressed as Pope so. At this, the daughter gives a small gasp, but Frau Redzinger has grown flushed and cheerful, as if this address to a coachful of strangers were perhaps more speech than she has allowed herself, save among her own sex, in who knows how long. Child, 'twould be far more sensible to forgive your sister, murmurs, excuse me, murmurs Mistress Edgewise, taking the young woman's hand. You must both you must both pass beyond it, dear. Her husband huffs forward, intending a similar courtesy toward the young woman's knee, but is deflected by a wifely stare that contrives to look amused, though indisposed to bantering. Frau Redzinger gestures expansively with her coffee cup, which is luckily, for the moment, empty. Oh yes, I am a bad sister, a bad wife and Christian. I am the one who must be forgiven somehow, but... She regards us each for a moment, her chin a-tremble. Of whom here would I ask it? Of course I resent Lizelle. I envy her life. She has her husband. At which looseness of tongue the daughter at last protests, but too late, for her mother has rushed on as we now go rushing along down the communication, above us our Jehu, son of Nimshi, taking chances he would never have taken in the daylight. 'Twas not the same as being struck by lightning. We've lightning over Schuylkill that's every bit the equal of Mr. Franklin's famous city lightning. Folk who have been hit by ours speak of being prisoned in a thunderous glory. But Peter was only bringing hops into the cooling pit, the most ordinary of tasks, slipped in the dust, fell in the pit, with the dried hops nearly 20 feet deep, hot from the kiln. You can squeeze them together almost forever. Drowning in them is easy. Last year it was a church person over at Kutztown. Even the odour of the pollen is deadly. The man's wife said that it took him into a poisoned sleep. But neither of us was with her husband when it happened. It is not a place women go. I was in the fields with the other women and the last of the harvest. The way it is, we work only with the living plants, so we tend the bines all summer. Soon as the cones are picked and dead, it is then the men take over, net. I don't know what I might have done. The hops buoyed him up, but not so much. When help arrived, they said they could see only his hand above the cones, releasing their dust in terrible fumes as his struggling broke them. By the time Jurgen could anchor himself, there was only my husband's one finger reaching back into this world. His poor finger. The force it took to pull him out. No physician anywhere could have put it back to what it was. Peter would call it his sacramental finger, his outward and bodily sign of the other thing that had happened to him down in that miserable suffocation. He bore it without shame, rather with bewilderment. Certain herbal essences in massive influxion, as I feel it my duty to assure her, have long been known and commented upon as occasions of God revealing. She nods emphatically. As weeks passed, she tells us, Peter Redzinger's account changed from a simple tale of witness to one of rapture by beings from somewhere else. Long, long from Pennsylvania, as he expressed it, and always at the centre of the relation, unwise to approach an unbearable luminosity. As God has receded, as deism has crept in to make the best of this progressive absence. More and more do we witness extreme varieties of human character emergent. Cagliostro, the Comte de Saint-Germain, Adam Weishaupt, magicians with Munchausen tales and ever more extravagant effects, Illuminati, Freemasons, elect Cohens, many of whom, to my great curiosity, have found their way into Pennsylvania. They wander the town streets, they haunt the desert places. They are usually Germans. Woe betide the credulous countryman who falls under their influence. Or, as in the case of Peter Redzinger, is transformed into one of them. Another American illumination, another sworn moment, and where in England are any epiphanies bright as these? Bring anything like one, any least sail upon the horizon of our exile, to the attention of an established clergyman, and 'twill elicit naught but gentle reproofs and guarded suggestions which must sooner or later include the word physician. These times are unfriendly toward worlds alternative to this one. Royal Society members and French encyclopedists are in the chariot, availing themselves whilst they may of any occasion to preach the gospels of reason, denouncing all that once was magic, though too often in smirking tropes upon the Church of Rome, visitations, bleeding statues, medical impossibilities, no, far too foreign. One may be allowed an occasional Cock Lane ghost, otherwise for any more in that article one must turn to Gothic fictions, folded acceptably between the covers of books. They say Peter is seen now over Susquehanna, aus dem Cap, wandering from one cabin to another. Anywhere 2 or more Germans may be gathered together, with his tales of the pit. He calls it preaching, so, to no one's surprise, do others. Some even follow him, Redzingerites, for whom his enlightenment, by way of nearly drowning, is the central event. Their view of baptism does not, need I say, stop at total immersion. I imagine him by now a creature of the forest. Perhaps I have mistaken my own destiny for his, and his elevation, sighing, has proved my inearthment. She speaks, it unfolds, of the Redzinger farm, an 100-acre parcel close to, if not actually in, Maryland. No one will know until the English surveyors come through. The proprietors of both provinces have been offering lower land prices, sometimes even exemption from the quit rent, to any who'll settle near boundaries in dispute. Peter Redzinger has always known good land. He can look at it and tell you, if you ask, what it will bear in abundance, what it will not tolerate. This place, as he has recognized from frequent visits to it in dreams since he was young, would give him back anything he wished. When he walked it, he discovered he was dousing it with his feet, and for more than water too, and had to keep his shoes on because his bare soles he could not withstand. Die Kraft, the forces. It whispers to him. He can almost make out the words. Sometimes he has tried to talk to Louisa about this, but with such difficulty that she always ended up thinking about her sister in Bethlehem and the dancing she might be missing after all. And it comes from the wind, moving through the underbrush. It is inside of the wind, and they are real words, and if you listen. She must have known quite early that the hop pit or something as decisive was waiting for them. Meanwhile, maize and morning glories, tomatoes and cherry trees, every flower and esculent known to Linnaeus thrived. The seasons swept through. Mitzi and then the boys were born. Louise and Peter built a bakery, smokehouse, stables, milk barn, hen coop, hop kiln, and cooling pit. His brothers and their families lived nearby. Like many in Lancaster County, they all have fields planted to hops and hemp. Each crop, for its own reasons of peace and war, is in rapidly growing demand and fetching good prices. Grot, one of the farmers whose land adjoins the Redzingers, has long coveted their farm, and furthermore believes that both farms are located in Maryland. Under Maryland law, he knows he may get a warrant to resurvey his land and in the process include any vacant land it happens to adjoin. The property line will be allowed to stretch about and engross it. By virtue of the resurvey, it will become his. Many were the elephantine tracts swallowed at one nibble in those times by the country mice thereabouts. Land defined as vacant includes land once settled but now inestiate, meaning gone back to the proprietor, usually for non-payment of taxes. Louise has been paying the quit rents to Pennsylvania, but Grot, contending that she dwells in Maryland and owes more back taxes there than she can ever pay, believes the land is escheatable. I am no attorney, I try to console her, but his case sounds doubtful. If he goes ahead, warns Mr. Edgewise, obtains a warrant, pays the caution money, has title, then it's his, if no one can prove the land isn't escheatable. All now fall to arguing about land jobbery, the discussion growing at times spirited and personal. Everyone in the coach, it seems, has suddenly become a Philadelphia lawyer. Why, Mrs. Edgewise demands to know, must this subject rouse quite so much passion? The purveyor of delusion confers upon his wife a certain expression or twist of fizz, I dare say as old as Holy Scripture, a lengthy range of sentiment, all compressed into a single melancholic swing of the eyes. From some personal stowage he produces another flask containing not the spruce beer ubiquitous in these parts, but that favoured stupefacient of the jumped-up tradesman, French claret, and without offering it to anyone else, including his wife, begins to drink. It goes back, he might have begun, to the second day of creation, when God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. Thus the first boundary line. All else after that, in all history, is but subdivision. What machine is it? Young Cherrycoke later bade himself good night. that bears us along so relentlessly. We go rattling through another day, another year, as through an empty town without a name. In the midnight, we have but memories of some pause at the pleasure spas of our younger day. The maidens, the cards, the claret, we seek to extend our stay, but now a silent functionary in dark livery indicates it is time to reboard the coach and resume the journey. Long before the destination, moreover, shall this machine come abruptly to a stop. Gathered dense with fear, shall we open the door to confer with the driver, to discover that there is no driver, no horses, only the machine, fading as we stand, and a prairie of desperate immensity.